Hey guys, OGLBina here, bringing you guys SPL Draft Notes week number 6. Draft Notes is the show about everything and anything SPL related. If you guys are excited for this week's episode, be sure to drop a like on the video as well as subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it a ton. We're on our way to 3,000 subscribers and it helps me out a ton if, you hit the sub button and push me closer to that goal. And yeah, hopefully we'll get there by the end of the year. With that being said, I do want to go ahead and just jump right into last week's recap. Now, week number 5 had some really interesting games. We can, of course, start off with the big 6-0 you see there with Mafesto versus Druby. We'll talk about this game a little bit more here in a second with the highlight matchups, but in this game, Sandaconda went crazy. Druby put himself in some unfortunate positions. He definitely got a little unlucky, but a lot of it was a little bit self-inflicted, like clicking U-turn on the static Zapdos with the Ogrepon, despite it doing negligible damage, was just kind of a unneeded risk, and that being parried in different burns and things like that definitely put Mafesto in a really good position, but he played it incredibly, and again, I don't think it was any fault to Mafesto's play. I think he played great and was able to take home a 6-0 dub. Then we have the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Copenhagen Gallades, where Mr. Pokeaimmd took out the win 2-0 in a very, very close game, giving Thomas his first loss. There was a lot of really cool text in this game, but Joey's offensive matchup was just really overwhelming. Pokemon like Polt went absolutely crazy on paper, and there really wasn't much Thomas could do in the grand scheme of the game. He brought some really cool text, though, that we'll talk about here in a second. Then we have Nexus versus CBAD in a really interesting 3-0 game. CBAD was in a pretty commanding position for a good little bit of the battle, and I honestly think while the endgame was going to be very, very close, because Nexus definitely brought it back with some great aggressive play and a great double in the middle of the game, CBAD kind of, unfortunately, didn't expect the Houndstone to do as much damage, I guess, as it would have when he went hard Raichu on the Houndstone, basically ensuring his loss. And, hindsight's 20/20, and sometimes things happen like that, but from that point, as soon as the Raichu was switched in, the game was over, and Nexus is able to pop off with Houndstone and what I think might have been its season debut in week 5, so really cool one to see there. Then we have Emvee versus Leo in his Carolina Hacksters. Espeon popping off once again. This time, still Calm Mind, but a much more offensive set than Emvee brought in the early season with his Terra Fairy sets. This one was Calm Mind, Terra Electric with just Calm Mind 3 attacks. And man, oh man, did it just nuke through Leo's team in that endgame. Once things had taken just a little bit of sufficient chip, it really just kind of nuked through everything. Now, granted, it probably wouldn't have gotten the sweep off when it did if it did not crit the Decidueye. However, because it would have been forced out with, the Parasong that was on the field. However, Emvee was in a pretty commanding spot from there regardless, and he either could have saved his Espeon or probably won with something else in the back, so I don't think it was necessarily a game-changing crit, more than a diff-changing crit. Then we have Kyle versus Danny, and this is an unfortunate one. This is a game that actually went to timer, for those of you who don't know. They unfortunately had to play on the 20-minute timer due to a mess up in competitions and, scheduling and things like that. So they had to play on the 20-minute timer. Despite that, I believe the game ended 4-2, so Danny obviously is, shown a 2-0 victory. Because that was the difference in differential, between that time. I think that's what they ended up scoring it. But Danny played really well this week. Pokemon like Okidogi were able to do well. He was able to, almost position that Sylveon to do really well in the game. Kyle played well too. I think the time definitely probably frazzled him and got to him. I think in a longer game, potentially this would have been very, very close to the end. But unfortunately, won't know, and that's just the downside of Game Freak giving us a 20-minute default timer, which is absolutely ridiculous. But hey, what can you do? Then we have Viz versus Shuckleking in another very interesting one. Unfortunately, Shuckleking taking a 2-3 loss. Definitely a little bit unlucky at certain points, but Viz ended up playing very, very well and taking home a nice 2-0 dub. And then lastly, we have the Bullet Punch Club versus In Vivid Color and his South Texas Sableye, taking home a nice 4-0 victory. The Kill Watcher was able to kind of come in and consistently pick one. The Scarf set was really smart here, able to outpace to the double Scarfer of Vivid, and kind of as Uzi was in an endgame scenario where he kind of was really low and things were chipped, he was able to kind of use his sack pieces accordingly to get in Killo and revenge kill faster than, Vivid could break through his sacks, and, he ended up winning the game pretty convincingly in a 4-0 victory. Now, pick'em score-wise this week, we went, I believe it was 5-2, a much better week than last week, where I think we went 3-4, or 2-4, or 2-5. So we're able to kind of extend our score. We are now 20-15. I told you guys my end-of-the-year goal is to end positive in pick'ems, and 2015, honestly, in my opinion, is not that bad, considering how close some of these games have been, so I'm definitely super here for that. Now, Next up, let's go ahead and talk about some highlight games from the week. Of course, first we're going to talk about Emvee and Leo and his Carolina Hacksters. I think this set was really smart in this matchup. We kind of talked about it briefly there a second ago, but the SPL with the CyleAye 3 attacks, I know it was Psychic, Shadow Ball, and I believe last move Terra Blast. I'm not 100% sure if I'm remembering correctly what that last move was, but regardless, once things were aptly chipped, once, you know, threats were worn down and things like that, the SPL found the position to come in on the screen tail and set up a CyleAye. Now, Leo was brought a very good bring, in my opinion, in Parasong Scream Tail, which was one, great for the Espeon, but also great for the Manaphy. If it was like some kind of mental herb set, it immediately forces something out. The only issue is Leo's team was so chipped down at that point to where once that CyleAye was up, everything was O-code. Minus, you know, obviously the crit on the Decidueye, which again did affect diff, but Emvee was able to position that thing well, pick up 4 KOs in this game, which is pretty darn impressive, and move his record and keep his undefeated streak going. Next up, speaking of undefeated streaks, Thomas's unfortunately came to an end, like we said, but I did want to shout out some really cool tech he brought in the Entrainment Pyro. Now, originally it was for Unaware Clefable, which is a great bring, and definitely makes a ton of sense, getting rid of that thing's ability. And honestly, I thought it was a really cool tech for potentially like a Heat Train too, taking away that thing's Flash Fire and being able to hit it neutrally with a Flamethrower is pretty darn cool in a one-on-one scenario, especially because I believe the Pyro was Terra Grass. I could be tripping. But it also ended up working out for the Magic Guard set because of the poison on it earlier in the game, because of the Life Orb that the Clefable was holding due to being Magic Guard. It ended up taking a lot of chip and basically making the Clefable useless, whereas it could have been a massive threat in that endgame, and it was able to take out and trade for that Clefable, which was a huge threat to the team that Thomas brought, especially because there was no Slowking Galar on the squad. So definitely a really cool use of tech, and honestly a really cool move that I'm sure a lot of you viewers really didn't know what it did going into this. So it was really cool to see, you know, that's why draft's so fun to me, because you could run cool techs like that and have it pop off. So unfortunately he took a loss, but I did want to shout out the set because I thought it was very, very innovative and very, very cool. Then, lastly, of course, we gotta shout out the 6-0 here with the Sandaconda, claiming 6 in this game. Terra Fairy, just Edgequake coverage with the Rest Shed skin set, and it went absolutely crazy. Now, the early burn on the Salamence did definitely suck, but it's not like the Sandaconda wasn't going to coil past that thing anyways, but mostly it was going to be something like the Ogerpon getting parried that could have potentially crit through the Terraing, you know, Sandaconda with its high crit rate IV Cudgel and things like that. The Electrode also missing Thunder was definitely huge, though hindsight, I think it might have been better to just Thunderbolt, though I guess you did die to a Stone Edge and Mafesto kind of fumbled a little bit by clicking EQ, but if he hit 2 Thunders, obviously he was able to take it down. Maybe just clicking 2 Thunderbolts would have brought it low enough, but honestly, I don't think so. Another option obviously would have been to click Head Smash instead of Flare Blitz, and since he also would have killed the Sandaconda. Obviously, you're risking a miss there, but at that point, if we miss, we lose anyways, or if we don't get the kill of Flare Blitz, we lose anyways, so it might have been better to go for that higher damage. Regardless, hindsight's 2020. Mafesto played really well. He was able to position it well and pick up a huge 6-0 victory here against Druby, grabbing himself, you know, a very, very convincing win. Alrighty, first up, let's talk about the matchup between the Bullet Punch Club and the Los Angeles Wakers. From the Wakers side, I mean, I put it as the highlight mod for last week, but it's because it's the greatest modern draft league history, and that's going to be Dragapult. First pick for a reason. I mean, what does Uzi do about this Pokemon? I think like a Specs variant or some kind of, even some kind of Boots variant if you really want to. Or Spell Tag, but regardless, Dragon plus Ghost is unbelievable into this team. Thunderbolt's also a clean tech for the Empoleon, being able to break through that, because the SPDF Empo is really kind of your best check to this thing. This thing with hazards up goes absolutely insane. Same thing with a Quackleval. I think a 4 attacks, either Choice Scarf or Band set, does really well. I think setup is a little bit slow in this game because Shaman exists, and it's hard to get like SD Aqua Step, kill the Shaman kind of deal. Now, if you can chip the Shaman, then some kind of SD or bulk up set definitely can do well, to be fair. But I don't think it's the optimal pathing to Quackleval winning or anything like that. I think it's much better for it to break alongside that Dragapult with spikes from that Overquill. Overquill gets free spikes forever and ever. Now, the Tusk obviously is an incredible spinner, but it always has to think twice in the back of its head, man, do I want to spin into this Pult? And if it does, obviously, that's a really, really bad position for Uzi. So I think the potential of Overquill spikes is definitely there. Clefable is obviously going to be an incredible Pokemon in this matchup. It checks Weavile plus Tusk really, really well. And then as for Terramon for Joey, I think he has two great Pokemon that he can go here. Terra Fairy Torque can definitely win the game, especially if Pokemon like the Shaman take a lot of chip damage. If that thing takes a lot of chip, Terra Fairy Torque definitely can set up a Shell Smash, win the video game pretty darn easily. But there's also an argument for Terra Fairy Chimecho into the matchup with Great Tusk Weavile. It's another great check into them, and in particular, that Great Tusk being immune to both of its stabs would be absolutely incredible, and something that not many things can boast. So that's obviously an option. Now, from Uzi's side, I do think that Tusk is very strong here. Either a Booster Energy attack or a Life Orb set seems very, very powerful at breaking through Joey's obnoxious team. The combination of ground, fighting, heavy slam, and then either knockoff, rapid spin, or even yeah, I guess knockoff Rapid Spin would probably be the main two, because Heavy Slam is going to blow up the flying immunities. Ice Spinner also makes sense for a potential Thunderous, but it's not like Thundy wants to switch into a close combat. The main way I think that you can use Tusk to your advantage is forcing in something like Clefable to try and take a hit, but potentially just 2-hit KOing the hell out of it with some kind of boosted attack. I know that booster attack, like Headlong/EQ into Heavy Slam, will definitely blow up the Clefable. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I think getting in Tusk early and often is going to be really good. Weavile can force a lot of progress with Knockoff as well, really whittling down different Pokemon, knocking off the Quackleval if it wants to come in, knocking off the Clefable, knocking off the Overqwell, things like that. While it may not immediately win in its own right, it spreads knocks, and Ice Shard is going to be great for Pokemon like Thundurus and the Dragapult, and then obviously having a Psychic immunity to Azelf is always going to be a decent thing, so definitely not too bad. And then Ursaluna, I think the dual ground core just goes absolutely crazy in this game. Facade ground just kills everything, and honestly, you can, if you want to use Tusk more defensively or more utility oriented, you can take the approach of getting in Bear on something slower or something that can't kill it, and then just pretty much guaranteeing yourself a KO in this matchup. So I definitely think that's great. We already mentioned Spadef and Poleon is going to be solid for the Dragapult. Water Kilowattrel also seems like the most likely Terra option from Uzi here. And honestly, Cryogonal might come to be the spinner. Open up that Tusk a little bit more offensively. Cryo can come in and be that spinner and get away those hazards. Now, it does allow a lot of things in for free, but it's not like it's you know, absolutely terrible in the matchup. And it can check things like Quackleval offensively with Freeze Dry. It can live a hit from Pult if Pult isn't carrying coverage for it. It can definitely take 2 Specs hits pretty darn easily. So I think that definitely could be an option. Also checks the Thunderous. But overall, I am going to lean AIM in this matchup because I think the offensive core of his top 2 in Dragapult Quackleval is just absolutely overwhelming for Uzi here. Alrighty, next up we have CBAD versus Invivid Color in a pretty offensive matchup here, in my opinion. Now, I think Ogerpon Fire just goes absolutely crazy into Vivid's team. He does not have consistent nor good counterplay into this Pokemon. His resists to either of its stabs really are pretty darn flimsy Pokemon, and with proper momentum and means of getting it in, I think it's going to do a ton of damage. Now, speaking of facilitating and getting it in, I think that's going to be Bundle's job this week. I think Bundle definitely comes, right? It revenges non-Scarf Chiyus and Grens, and it forces very specific switches. In particular, it forces in that Goldango. We'll talk about it in a second, but I think Goldango is definitely Vivid's best answer to Bundle. The only issue is we catch that thing with the flip turn, we get into our Ogerpon, and then we kill something. Almost every single time, it feels like. So, I think that that's going to be a great option for CBAD to try and potentially win this game, is going to be getting an Ogerpon as much as possible, not even trying to set up and win with it, but just clicking fire plus grass coverage, as well as maybe potentially a low kick for something like a Cyclizar or a Chiyu. I'm not sure on their heaviness, like calcs and things like that, but the fighting coverage regardless is not bad at all. So that could be big. I think Hydra comes off the bench this week for sure as well. I think some kind of Assault Vest variant could be very solid here. Maybe Yachi Berry for the Gren, but I like Assault Vest because it checks the Chiyu very well as well. And it obviously soft checks the Gren and is really good offensively in this game. The combination of Dragon, Dark, and then you can go Flash Cannon for the Enam and then just U-turn is going to be really strong in this matchup and can be really annoying for Vivid to switch into over the course of the game, especially because if we wear down that Enam, Pokemon like Raichu and your terrain offense go absolutely crazy. I also think that a Lunar, I think it's Lunar Dance, the one that is basically Healing Wish, right? And this Lunar Blessing is the new one. Regardless, the one that brings back a teammate could be very valuable for CBAD in this game. There's going to be a lot of things that take a lot of damage. Something like the Hydra getting Lunar Danced up and getting another life because of obviously the loss of Roost this generation would be very, very nice, obviously. I think that even something like Ogerpon, because it doesn't have any, means of you know, avoiding those rocks that are probably going to go up on Vivid's side. Getting that thing up could be really, really big. And yeah, then from Vivid's side, I think that Gren does do really well here. Pokemon like Hydra getting chipped is really all that's needed to kind of set up a Battle Bond endgame, in my opinion, and that's probably the route that I would go if I was going to be Vivid here. On top of that, SPL Gholdengo is like the bundle check. It checks it phenomenally. Even Specs variants, like into like Boots, SPL Gholdengo, it eats up Hydros and just recovers forever, and it can definitely be a big nuisance. While Pokemon like Hydra can potentially switch in, other than that, there isn't great switch-ins to Gholdengo, even if it's not very invested, and it can spread Thunder Waves and, you know, different status, like a T-Wave Hex set could definitely come up pretty clutch in this game, and it's not like the things that break Gholdengo want to switch hard in on Gholdengo. Now, if it does get called a flip turn, it's a little bit more unfortunate, but because of this, I think a big importance from Vivid's side is going to be getting up hazards. And I think Scarf Cleavor is going to be the biggest benefactor, or the biggest, you know, mon to do so in this matchup. Reason being is because not only is it, you know, solid offensively, or not only are rocks important, it's solid offensively. It's kind of what I meant to lead into. There's not great rock resist. Something like Donphan obviously is a great spinner and rock resist, but you catch the thing with U-turn and get into a breaker like something like Gren, and he's in a pretty scary spot, right? So that's something very important to keep in mind, but it's also very strong offensively. It revenges things like Ogerpon. It revenges things like Iron Bundle if it's not Scarf. It revenges things like Hydreigon if it's not Scarf. Same thing with a non-terrained Raichu. You can click a neutral Stone Axe into it and absolutely blow it up. It's strong into things like Crest. So Cleavor looks really strong on Vivid's side, and I definitely think that he should go with some kind of Scarf variant and just click buttons. Outside of that, EnamT also looks very important. It checks a lot of the offense on the other side. In particular, something like the Hawlucha and the Hydreigon are going to be very much so hard checked by that. And it's going to be a very solid piece here. Overall, though, I am going to go CBAD in a very slight margin here, just because I think his offensive matchup is absolutely incredible. And as long as he can keep up momentum and get up hazards early, he should be in a pretty darn good spot. Next up, we have the WAN Wakes versus Viz and his, I think it's Mediterranean Mimikyus. I totally said one name and I was like, shit, I forget the other name completely. But from Danny's side, I definitely think the WAN Wake is incredible in this matchup. There's not much that switches into Sun Wake, really. Now, I don't know if I would go choice in this matchup. Specs is pretty okay, but maybe some kind of Life Orb set, maybe some kind of Expert Belt set, maybe some kind of even just like Mystic Water set looks really strong. Hydro Stream plus Draco is just unguardable on this team, especially if you tech on like a Flamethrower for something like the Corviknight, especially in Sun. You're absolutely going to nuke through this team with your WAN Wake. Okidoki also looks pretty strong. Some kind of bulk up variant once the Annihilate is gone is very solid. You do kind of have to eliminate Annihilate because you're not Terra Oki, but if you can do so, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. Sylveon also checks a lot of this offense and things like the Dragonite, the Jolteon especially, which looks really obnoxious in this game. And then Brambleghast, actually, I think is a really nice spinner here, and I think it definitely has a lot of potential to potentially come in this game. Obviously, Pokemon like Corviknight are going to switch into it, but you can definitely spin away all these hazards pretty well because the Spin Blocker and Ape does not want to come in and take a Poltergeist to the face. So I definitely could see the Brambleghast coming and doing really well here. And then Zard also might be another bring, just because something like Ape is so strong, and we'll talk about it here in a second. I think the more special offense you have for that thing is, you know, the better. You can also bring Monkey Dory, but I don't think Monkey Dory is very good into anything else. It's very hard to bring Monkey Dory into Tinglu Corviknight, right? Like very difficult to, you know, kind of justify doing so. So I think the Zard might have to come off the bench in order to break through that thing even more. And if there's a combination of like Zard, Ninetales, Wake as like special attackers that are faster than Ape, that might be your best way of slowing that thing down, because holy crap is that thing strong here. Speaking of which, yeah, it goes insane. It's the highlight mon in this matchup. I think Annihilate does ridiculously well, whether it be, again, just a SPL bulk up set, bread and butter, nice and easy, or, again, the, you know, neat tech Assault Vest set coming in and taking multiple hits. You also can soft check things like Lycanroc, you can check things like Sandy Shocks, you can check things like, I mean, so many different things in this team. You're obnoxious. You switch into Okidoki forever, like forever. So that's obviously a really cool aspect of this guy. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm a little tired. There's also a D-Knight angle as well. The combination of Dragon Claw, Iron Head, and then either EQ or E-Speed does really, really well here if things do take sufficient chip and we get up the necessary hazards to whittle things down, which I don't think is too hard. Some kind of FizzDef Corviknight seems like almost a necessity. You already check something like Monkey Dory anyways, but I think having some kind of pivot into that Lycanroc is really, really important, and Tinglu isn't as good as Corviknight would be, obviously, because Corviknight's neutral into CC, whereas Tinglu is weak to it, technically, so that's something important to note. I think Jolteon can get really overwhelming alongside Pokemon like Glamora Hazards and like a breaker like Armarouge coming in, because yeah, there's something like Sylveon that can always kind of take on Jolteon in a 1v1 scenario, but then you catch that Volt Switch to the face, and then out comes the Armarouge, and you're like, oh damn, I don't have a good switch into Armarouge, it's Walking Wake, right? And speaking of which, obviously I think Armarouge is strong. So in general, if I'm Viz, I stack, Prosper, and Overwhelm before I am overwhelmed with offense. I think the combination of hazards being up, Volt switching around forever, getting in strong breakers like Armarouge, D-Knight can totally open up an Annihilate endgame, or again, Armarouge Annihilate can open up a D-Knight endgame, in my opinion. So I'm going to lean Viz here. I do think this is a really close matchup, to be completely honest, but I do lean Viz in this matchup. Next up, we have KyleAye versus Druby in a pretty interesting matchup. You see my boy, Roaring Moon, one of my favorite Pokemon ever. Obviously, he's a big Salamence guy, as the highlight mod in this matchup, and this might be the most demon-banded Roaring Moon matchup of all time. Now, I'm not too sure on setup. Setup definitely has an angle to win, but I think the combination of the Hail offense, the combination of double Intim potentially, and things like that make it to where DD Moon is okay, but I think Bandit is incredible. The combination of Knockoff, U-Turn, Earthquake, and then probably Bandit Outrage looks insane. Now, I know there's double steal here, but there's no fairy, and there's a ton of things on Kyle's team that really, really beats down those steals and can force them in often to take a lot of damage. And I think that is going to be the most important thing for Kyle, is forcing damage on those Dragon Resist and opening up either a Dragon Claw or an Outrage Bandit endgame looks very, very promising in my opinion. Now, offensive Chilling Water Ninetales can be one of those Pokemon. Obviously, Chilling Water is going to hit the Arcanine for a lot of damage. If you're like a Nasty Plot Ninetales set, you actually OHKO the Arcanine if it's not super bulky at +2. I checked the calc because I was like, I wonder if this doesn't kill. It does, just barely, but it does. But Pokemon like Orthworm are not known for their super death. Pokemon like Ogerpon are going to get blown up by Freeze Dry. And obviously you check it. Iron Treads is going to be really the only switch into that. And if we force the Iron Treads in consistently, and it takes consistent freeze dry damage and hazard damage and things like that, maybe even a Chilling Water to the face once or twice, we're going to be in a really good spot for our Moon endgame. So I think offensive Alola Tails can definitely be a, really solid angle here. I think that there's also the option of Beartick. Beartick is going to be really strong as well. As we mentioned, there's double steel, but they are somewhat susceptible. I think some kind of like Terra Electric set could be really, really strong here, or even Terra Ice again, maybe like a Bandit set. I do lean Electric because I think defensively it's a solid typing into a lot of things, and it kind of makes Orthworm not as scary. Some kind of SD set can definitely be really, really strong. If you could go Terra Water in this matchup, I definitely think you go that, but I don't believe that's one of his typings. But you're also able to blow up the Shuckleking, which is really, really nice. And yeah, Belly Bolt, though. I also have to mention Belly Bolt as another Terra option. Now, I think you can kind of keep your Belly Bolt as the same typing it is, but like some kind of FizzDef Rocky Helmet Belly Bolt, while you're stuffed by the Iron Treads, if you catch it with a Muddy Water or Chilling Water, you're doing decent chip damage. And other than that, FizzDef Helmet checks Ogerpon, it checks the Arcanine, it checks the Zapdos, it checks the Ments. It does really well here. So I actually think that some kind of FizzDef, Belly Bolt without tearing looks really, really strong here and really, really obnoxious for Druby's team, at least in my opinion. And then you have something like the Tauros, which I think is required for the Hisuian Arcanine, which goes crazy otherwise, but it seems almost required. Then, on Druby's side, Ogerpon is pretty strong here as like a U-turn variant, I think, in my opinion. Now, there's definitely like instances where it can kind of set up and win, but I think Pokemon like Rillaboom kind of do deter that from really happening, as well as kind of the fourth moveset syndrome that this thing really kind of, struggles with in this game. I think you're much better off U-turning as the Rillaboom comes in and getting in something strong that's really scary. Maybe like a Special Ments. Physical's okay, but I think Special is going to be a little bit better in this matchup. The combinations of like Hydro, not even Hydro, just Hurricane Draco Roost, and then 4th move. Looks really, really strong in this game. Like, incredibly strong in this game, and I definitely could see that being a solid breaker, as well as defensive pivot into things like Rillaboom, into things like Tauros, into, yeah, mainly those two, to be completely honest, but, you know, still very strong. AV Treads also does well offensively. You can probably run, you know, your dual stabs, plus knockoff, and then Volt Switch as your last. You could also run Ice Spinner, potentially, over knockoff. I think that knock is going to be a little bit better. Knocking off a helmet off that Tauros, and then just kind of vaulting forever is going to be very, very valuable, in my opinion. And it also helps open up an endgame for your Titan, which I think is going to be one of the better win conditions in this game. I don't think it's going to be a setup Titan. Doesn't really have the coverage to do so, but the combination of like Ice plus Play Rough plus, you know, maybe some kind of like Heavy Slam or something like that for the Ninetales makes it really, really powerful in this game if Pokemon like Tauros end up taking any kind of chip damage at all. And then Terra Ice Trode is also just, you know, a solid breaker and momentum grabber alongside something like your Treads in this game. But I do lean Kyle here. I think that his offense is really overwhelming. I think he has much more defensive counterplay to Drewby's team than Druby does to Kyle, if that makes any sense. So I am going to go Kyle here in this one, a slight margin. Next up, we have Leo versus Shuckle King. And then from Leo's side, man, I think this is like one of the most insane Nasty Plot Taunt matchups ever. Nasty Plot, Hurricane or Bleak Wind, Heat Wave, and then Taunt in that last slot for Pokemon like Amoonguss, for Pokemon like Umbreon especially, makes this thing an absolute monster. And it can come in and do it multiple times because it has the best ability of the game in Regenerator. I think it's great here. Mamoswine is also obviously incredible. Ice Shard picks off the top 3 on Shuckle's team. Pretty darn uncontested, so having that as well as a Pokemon that really breaks through Shuckle's fat pretty darn well makes it incredibly strong in this matchup. Scream can check either the Chomp or the Enam. I'm probably making my my Scream to a little bit more Fizz Def to check the Chomp because you have Pokemon like Pex for an Amorous, so good defensive counterplay for both. You do probably have to run a Sludge Bomb Pex to not be absolute fodder for that Enamorous, but definitely a really solid, you know, bring in this matchup. And then some kind of SC Hands I think does really well. You can either go Helmet, Shook-a-Berry, or even a Punching Glove variant, because I think the combination of Drain Punch, Thunder Punch, Ice Punch absolutely wrecks Shuckle, beats his bulk, beats a lot of his top tier offense. And really the only thing that immediately revenges it is going to be something like an Amorous. And you could even go like an Assault Vest variant if you want. Now I think SD is a little bit better because it breaks his fat much easier, but you can go either, to be completely honest. And the reason I say Punching Glove over like Shuka is because of the fact that you're going to live an EQ from Chomp. From pretty healthy. I'd say from like 50% on up, unless it's boosting item. Like, hey, I think the bulk of Iron Hands is very much so underestimated by a lot of people. It's insane. And lastly, offensively, Annihilate. Jeez, I got last matchup on the mind. Infernape looks absolutely insane here. I think Choice Band just absolutely cooks. Flare Blitz, Close Combat, Mach Punch, and then U-Turn or Stone Edge in the last slot. I'd probably go, or Rock Slide as well. Also works because it's going to kill Talonflame regardless. I would probably just not even go U-Turn. Why am I ever clicking U-Turn? You know, like ever. You catch that Talonflame once and then everything dies to Close Combat, so Flare Blitz. Everything. There's no answer. Bulky Water Tatsugiri means Flare Blitz is unbelievably free. And honestly, you probably break through the Talonflame enough to where you're always forcing it into a Roost anyways. And then you can get into a Pokemon like Torn and really put in some work. Maybe get into a Pokemon like Toxapex and get up T-Spikes if there's no Amoonguss or Amoonguss is dead or something like that. Like, there's definitely a lot of options for Leo here. Now, from Shuckle's side, I think Enam looks good with like a sub-Calm Mind variant. You can also go physical with like Superpower, Play-Ups, and Headbutt, but it feels a little bit slower to get that going because we have to Superpower and things like that, whereas like a sub-CM set can really take advantage of something like Toxapex that's not carrying like a Sludge Bomb. You can definitely sub and 1v1 that thing pretty easily. Now, you do get Encore by Scream Tail, but if you can get a really strong Moonblast off on Scream Tail, that also opens up Garchomp, which also looks really solid here. Meowscarada obviously looks really good here as well. Either some kind of spiking variant, which I think was what I would personally bring, or Banded looks pretty solid here. Just kind of, you know, knocks items off and gets up spikes. And Flower Trick is honestly pretty hard to, you know, guard against, even with Pokemon like Iron Hands and Torn on your team. After you take a knock and some hazards, it becomes a lot more difficult to switch into that guy. Miss Mag also looks really strong here just because I don't think Leo brings Komala, because it is a Komala and that's not a real Pokemon. So I think if it doesn't come, Mismagius looks insane because while Zoroark definitely has a place in this matchup, it doesn't switch into Shadow Ball. It doesn't switch into anything, actually. So I think that Mismagius definitely has an angle here. And then Jirachi is probably just going to function as like a pivot. It's going to T-Wave, U-turn into offense, and hopefully Shuckle can grab, you know, some momentum. But I am going to lean Leo here. I'm actually going to take the upset here. I think Leo might grab his first victory of the season because I think his matchup is pretty darn good offensively with the likes of his top 3 plus Iron Hands. It's pretty hard to switch into and deal with this team, so we're going to go Leo. Next up, we have Nexus versus Mafesto, and holy moly, look at Iron Moth. Now, I personally think that Specs is incredible. You can go some kind of booster set, some kind of heavy-duty boot set, but man, regardless of how you look at it, the SPL wall on Mafesto's team gets absolutely cooked by a poison move, so what deals with Iron Moth? Nothing defensively, at least. Maybe some kind of Spirigraph into non-specs variants. Maybe even Dragonair comes off the bench for it. Or maybe we just decide we're going to kill it offensively and not worry about trying to switch into this absolute monster, because it kills just about everything in this game. Another Pokemon that does really well is going to be Ogerpon Cornerstone in this matchup. I think like a dual stabs set with like Spiky Shield to obviously rack up chip on potentially U-turners and bullet punchers and things like that don't have any, you know, reliable recovery. Alongside either the combination of SD or Encore does really well. I initially said SD not because I think it sweeps, but because it could really help out in breaking through something like a Sandaconda once it tears if we SD and crit through it with Ivy Cudgel, or something like a Florges if we want to 1v1 a little bit easier. Or something like going a Zapdos, or something like, you know, beating Serena 1v1 in an easier scenario. There's like niche instances where SD is good, whereas I do think most of the time you're clicking Ivy Cudgel / like Power Whip / Woodhammer. But I was talking about these matchups with Amel. I typically talk about them with him a lot because, you know, he's a very smart mind when it comes to draft. And he mentioned Encore being really good, and I think that's an incredible bring on the Ogerpon in this matchup, in my opinion. It potentially, you know, catches in like Sandaconda, perma-locking it into Coil, perma-locking it into Rest, whatever it may be. Always forces it out, and it always puts Nexus in a really, really good position, obviously, to potentially win the game. Because if it terras, it has the chance of being crit by Ivy Cudgel, and obviously it's locked in. And if it doesn't, then we just kind of like Power Whip / Woodhammer / Horn Leech through it until we get the crit. So locking it into Coil really is not a bad thing at all, honestly. So I definitely think that the Ogerpon can do well. Knockoff is obviously an option as well, but yeah, I think Helmet Flip Turn Aloe is also really good defensively in this matchup. Checks a lot things like the Samurott, like the Cinderace, like the Scizor, and also flip turns, and it gets in the Cornerstone really, really darn well because the responses to Aloe are going to kind of be Ogerpon fodder. So I think that's definitely cool. Same thing with the Moth. Mandibuzz seems really good for Defog. Obviously getting rid of those spikes at the Ceaseless Edge is setting up some kind of like knockoff Toxic Defog reset. Could be really solid, or Foul Play over Knockoff. I think Knockoff's probably better, to be completely honest, unless you're really worried about Scizor in particular, or like an SD Hammerot. But even then, Hammerot resists Foul Play, so I don't know. You probably better off just toxicing it anyways. And then, obviously, I think Hippo is going to be really solid in checking the Fish Stuff offense. You can also bring something like the Houndstone off the bench to take advantage of the Hippo's weather, or something like Trope, which grabs free Volt Switches forever and ever. And my hot take for this matchup is I think Valiant actually might sit the bench. If you look at Mafesto's team, I think he has an incredible Valiant matchup. Cinderace, which outspeeds it, Scarf Gengar, which resists dual stabs, Zapdos, which checks the hell out of it, Scizor, which checks the hell out of it. I don't think Valiant's very good here, to be completely honest. I think it's actually probably one of the worst Valiant matchups I've ever seen in my life. Now, other things from Mafesto's side, I think SD Hisui Rock goes absolutely nuts. SDing on, like, you know, a switch into something like the Aloe, and blowing it up and doing a ton with +2 Ceaseless Edge and 2-hit KO and getting 2 spikes out of it is great. Same thing with something like a Mandibuzz. You're going to 1v1 the hell out of that thing. You're going to SD and then Razor Shell through it twice, and absolutely blow it up. The Aqua Jet priority is really strong into things like the Iron Moth, into things like the weakened Iron Valiant, into things like the Cornerstone. And yeah, I think just dual stabs SD with like a Mystic Water goes absolutely insane. You could also go Banded here, but I really do like Swords Dance personally. Then that Pokemon getting up spikes plus Cinderace, Scizor, and Zapdos momentum seem really obnoxious for Nexus, so I really do think that he's going to want to get rid of those hazards ASAP. Sandaconda could get out of hand with like Terra Fairy or Water, but no matter what it tears into, it is weak to something in the back, so it's something he's going to have to be very careful about. You can honestly even see just like Terra Ground because it's better neutrally, in my opinion, into this team. But yeah, overall, I am going to lean Nexus just because I think that, like, his fat defensive core gaining momentum into things like Iron Moth and Cornerstone is just going to be too much for Mafesto, in my opinion. I think that the Iron Moth in particular is just going to pick one every single time, and it's really hard for Mafesto to do much about it. So I am going to lean Nexus in this game in an upset win. Next up, and lastly, we have Thomas versus Emvee. And now from Emvee's side, I think Blood Moon looks really, really strong here. It always looks strong. Pokemon's absurdly powerful. But in particular this matchup, it does look really powerful. Some kind of Calm Mind variant could definitely do really, really well. Some kind of Specs variant could also do well. I don't know about Specs. Maybe a Resist Berry 3 or 4 attack set could also be very strong here. Tech Vacuum Wave could always be nice, just like Baxcalibur if it ends up getting out of hand. I think Coil the Dunsparce also looks really, really strong in this matchup. If Spiritomb does not come, which we'll talk about, then Coil the Dunsparce can kind of just, pack this team up and do incredibly, incredibly well. It's really, really hard for Thomas to break throughout the course of the game. I think that Emvee needs to find a way to take advantage of Gliscor with momentum into getting it something that immediately threatens it. Because we'll talk about it in a second. You can see it's like the highlight mon. Gliscor, Glow King kind of wall everything. So it's a little bit scary. Maybe Manaphy can come in and, use this opportunity to absolutely break through. Maybe you go Rindo Berry set for the Zarude and you go like Tail Go 3 attacks. Like Surf, Ice Beam, Energy Ball. The only issue is AV Glow King also checks the hell out of you. So it's a little bit more tough. I'd say maybe a Take Heart set, but you don't have access to that move in this league, so it makes it a little bit tougher for Emvee to kind of get things going with the Manaphy, in my opinion. Now, like I said, from Thomas's side, Glow King plus Gliscor just smashes. It's so ridiculously obnoxious how good this core is here. Gliscor defensively can either be like a Swords Dance variant, it could be a potential Toxic Protect variant. I definitely think it wants Protect, definitely goes Protect EQ, but then it's a matter of if it goes like SD Facade, SD Knockoff, Hazards plus Toxic, U-Turn plus Toxic. Like, there's a ton of options for this thing to be incredibly, incredibly obnoxious. I mean, look at all the things it checks in this game. It's going to check Pokemon like Blood Moon with Protect. If it doesn't have Hyper Voice, Blood Moon is going to get walled by a Protect Gliscor. It's just going to, which is pretty insane. Sneasler is checked. Goodra is soft checked, depending on, if it's carrying Ice Beam. Dunsparce is checked. Espeon is checked. Thundurus is walled. Like, there's a lot of things that this Gliscor, absolutely stuff, and things that it doesn't, Glow King deals with phenomenally. So that's a really, really scary thing. I think some kind of SD or Banded Vax absolutely smashes through. I don't think you go Dragon Dance here. I think either, like I said, like a Banded set or like an SD Shard set looks really, really strong here. The Ice Resist on Emvee's team are somewhat flimsy. You have Manaphy, which obviously does not want to take Dragon moves, and that's it. Those are the only Ice Resists, because we don't count Intellibird, obviously. And maybe some kind of setup set isn't great into something like the Sableye or the Weezing. So I think clicking Banded Icicle Crash and then maybe like a Banded Glaive Rush, Ice Shard, and then your last move can be like potentially EQ. It could even be Scale Shot, because there's no Fairy outside of the Terra Fairy. Or just kidding, there's a Weezing. Maybe it could be Scale Shot, maybe it could be, Iron Head / EQ. There's definitely a ton of options, but I think Bandit is going to be really, really strong here in this matchup. Zarude also feels very strong. I think some kind of Scarf Zarude looks really good. Some kind of Yachi Zarude. There's not great consistent counterplay switches to it. Dual Stabs plus U-Turn plus like a Close Combat potentially, or like a Stomping Tantrum, whatever it ends up wanting to go for. It doesn't immediately smash everything, but it really helps out the rest of the team by spreading knockoffs and U-Turns and being annoying, as Zarude typically does. I think Spiritomb should come in this game. I think that's one of the biggest, anti-Mickey Mons in this matchup, because of the fact that, like I said, I think Coil the Dun absolutely smashes, and if the Spiritomb isn't there to, wall it with some kind of Calm Mind or Nasty Plot set, I think things are going to get pretty darn out of hand pretty darn fast. So that's something to, keep in mind. But yeah, I think that Thomas is actually going to pull off, an upset and kind of give Emvee his first loss like he gave last week. I guess it's not a super big upset. Both these coaches are absolutely killing it. I can see it going either way. But I think Thomas's defensive core of Glow King Gliscor is just too good into Emvee's team. I really do think it's an incredible defensive core here, and I'm going to pick Thomas. Alrighty, gang, that was Draft Notes week number 6. Let me know what you guys think of our matchups in the comments below. Let me know who you have in this week. Let me know what your most excited or the most hype plays from last week are, if you miss or if I missed anything like that. And yeah, again, if you enjoyed, drop a like, sub if you're new. Hopefully we get to 3,000 soon. I need your help to do so. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.